I never imagined betrayal would come from within my own family, let alone in such a brutal way. The memory is still sharp. The sudden yank of my hair. The sting as I was dragged across the floor by the very man who had promised to cherish and protect my daughter. Came my son-in-law, someone I welcomed into my home, treated like blood, reduced me to nothing more than an obstacle in his path. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that beneath his cruelty lay a secret I had carefully guarded for years. $5 million. Not in rumor, not in wishful thinking, real, tangible, life-altering wealth. The kind of secret that turns betrayal into irony and cruelty into fuel. This is not just a story of pain. It is the story of resilience, foresight, and the shocking consequences of underestimating the wrong person. Family is supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where trust and love weave together to form bonds that feel unbreakable. When my daughter introduced the man who would become my son-in-law, I welcomed him with open arms. He was polite, attentive, and quick to charm not only her but the rest of us as well. He laughed at our jokes, listened to our stories, and seemed eager to blend seamlessly into our traditions. At family dinners, he would offer to help with the dishes, pouring wine as though he had always belonged. To the outside world, and even to us in those early days, he was a perfect addition to the family tapestry. But cracks have a way of showing when you know where to look. And in hindsight, the warning signs had always been there. His compliments often came laced with comparison. Your house is nicer than my parents', or this business of yours must be worth a fortune. What seemed like harmless flattery then now reads as a measuring of assets, a calculation of value. He was fascinated with numbers, possessions, and status in ways that didn't quite align with our family's modest pride in hard work and integrity. His charm was effective, but at times it felt rehearsed, as though he were auditioning for a role rather than living authentically within it. My daughter, blinded by love, brushed off these subtleties. She believed his ambition was a strength, not recognizing how easily ambition can morph into greed. And I wanting so desperately for her happiness chose silence over confrontation. I reminded myself that every young man comes with flaws, that marriages are built on patience and growth. Still, certain moments stuck with me. The way his eyes lingered too long on expensive jewelry at family gatherings, how he would ask probing questions about the business without much understanding of its depth, and how he seemed most comfortable when conversations revolved around success, wealth, and influence, despite those uneasy flickers. Family warmth remained the dominant note. We celebrated birthdays, shared holidays, and built memories together. The house echoed with laughter, the smell of food, the comfort of shared history. He played his part well, smiling for photographs, raising toasts, and embracing the image of unity we projected. But under that veneer, small tensions were growing, almost invisible to the untrained eye. An offhand comment here, a dismissive smirk there. It was easy to miss them when drowned in the noise of celebration. Looking back, I realize how skillfully arrogance can disguise itself as confidence, how greed can hide behind ambition. What seemed like harmless quirks were actually seeds planted deep in the soil of our family, waiting for the right moment to grow into something destructive. Love and trust had made me overlook the warnings, but life has a way of exposing truth. That son-in-law we thought we knew was not the man he truly was. Money for many is just numbers on paper or figures glowing on a screen. For me, it was something far more profound, was proof of sacrifice, perseverance, and resilience. The $5 million I had quietly built over the years was not born out of luck or sudden windfall. It was the product of countless late nights at the office, strategic decisions that carried both risk and reward, and an unyielding determination to create security for my family. Every dollar represented moments I had chosen discipline over indulgence, work over leisure, and foresight over complacency. Yet despite its significance, I chose to keep this fortune a secret. Some would call it unusual, even suspicious. But I understood the power of discretion. Wealth, once revealed, can change the way people look at you. It alters dynamics, breeds entitlement, and can even poison love and loyalty with the taste of greed. I had seen it happen to others' families torn apart by disputes over inheritance, friendships crumbling under the weight of envy. I refused to let those shadows fall across my own home. Silence, I decided, was my strongest safeguard. The fortune wasn't hidden out of mistrust alone. It was also a symbol of independence, a reminder that no matter what storms life brought, I would not be left vulnerable. It was my shield against uncertainty, my safeguard for my children and grandchildren, and my way of preserving the legacy my late spouse and I had built together. In my mind, it wasn't just money. It was a living testament to endurance. A silent guardian of the values that had defined my life. Ironically, the secrecy only deepened its power. My family assumed I lived comfortably, but no one imagined the true scale of what I had amassed. They saw me as steady, responsible perhaps, even a bit frugal. The idea of hidden millions never crossed their minds because I never let it. My lifestyle was simple, my habits modest, and I rarely indulged in extravagance. That choice wasn't born of stinginess, but of strategy. I wanted the fortune to remain untouched until the time was right, until it could serve its real purpose, protecting and empowering those I loved most. But secrecy has a double edge. By concealing the fortune, I also created a gap in understanding between myself and those closest to me. They did not know of the security quietly resting beneath their feet, the cushion that could have softened future hardships. And in that silence lay the seeds of misunderstanding. For while I had been protecting them from greed, ambition, and entitlement, I had also left them blind to the full scope of what was at stake. The fortune, unknown to them, became the very target of betrayal. It was as though fate had tested my decision to hide it, turning my silence into both shield and trap. The $5 million symbolized strength, but it also drew out the weakness in others. My son-in-law's actions proved what I had feared all along. Money has the power to reveal true character, and when its scent lingers in the air, masks begin to fall. At first, the cracks appeared small, almost unremarkable, like faint hairlines on glass that only revealed their danger when struck by pressure. My son-in-law had once been polite, respectful, even deferential. He knew how to smile in the right moments, how to offer a hand when it was convenient, and how to position himself as the ideal husband and son-in-law. But beneath the surface, his hunger for control simmered. The first signs showed in subtle disagreements. Who should handle small property matters? Who had the right to make decisions about family gatherings, and even how the children should be raised? These disputes might have seemed trivial, but they carried a weight that only grew heavier with time. He began questioning long-standing traditions in the family. A simple holiday dinner turned into a debate about whether certain customs were outdated. Decisions I had once made without argument suddenly met resistance. At first, I brushed it off, believing it was part of generational differences. Younger voices, after all, often want to leave their own mark. But it wasn't just about opinions, it was about dominance. His tone grew sharper, his words bolder, as though he were testing how far he could push boundaries. Disagreements over property were where his ambition became undeniable. A small parcel of land, something I had long held onto as both investment and legacy, suddenly became the subject of relentless questioning. Why not sell? He pressed. Why let it sit unused when it could bring in money? Arguments weren't framed as suggestions, they were cloaked in the insistence of someone who believed he already had a say. I reminded him gently, then firmly, that decisions regarding family property rested with me. His smile grew thin, his eyes colder, each refusal a bruise to his ego. It wasn't long before he shifted from open debate to quieter, more manipulative tactics. He began whispering to other family members, planting doubts and weaving narratives about how I was too controlling. How perhaps I wasn't thinking of the family's best interest anymore. Words meant to divide found their way into everyday conversations, subtle enough to avoid confrontation, but sharp enough to sting. At times, I caught relatives hesitating before agreeing with me, their uncertainty betraying the seeds he had sown. The more I resisted his pressure, the more his frustration grew. He masked it under charm when outsiders were present, but within the family, his veneer cracked. He interrupted, dismissed, and even mocked small cuts that accumulated into deeper wounds. He wanted not just influence, but authority. And though he never said it outright, I began to sense he believed that marrying into the family entitled him to take what he pleased, regardless of the years of effort and sacrifice that had built it. Family loyalty became a battlefield of its own. While some stood firmly with me, recognizing the selfishness driving his behavior, others wavered under his manipulation. It was painful to see bonds I had nurtured for decades tested by whispers of doubt. The dinners that once echoed with laughter now carried tension, so thick it could be felt in the silence between words. What hurt most was not the disagreements themselves, but the disrespect woven into them. Respect, once offered freely, became conditional, given only when it served his purpose, withheld when he wanted to provoke. The balance of love and loyalty clashed with his selfishness, turning even ordinary family moments into minefields. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing week. Arguments flared over matters both small and large. Choices about property, decisions about respect, even control over family narratives. Everything became a contest. And in that contest, I began to see him not as a son-in-law, but as an adversary. The growing tension was no longer just conflict. It was a warning, a shadow creeping closer, preparing me for the storm that I now knew was inevitable. It happened on an evening that should have been ordinary, the kind of evening when the world feels calm and unremarkable. But within those walls, the storm that had been building finally erupted. Words had already been exchanged, sharp and heated, his voice rising with the kind of anger that no longer cared for masks. My refusal to yield, whether about property, respect, or legacy, was more than he could tolerate. I could see it in his eyes, the fury of a man who felt cornered, denied the control he believed was rightfully his. The argument escalated quickly. His words cut like blades, filled with accusations of stubbornness, of selfishness, of clinging to authority that he believed belonged to him now. I responded calmly, firmly, refusing to bend, each word I spoke a barrier against the storm he unleashed. But his anger, unchecked and unrestrained, tipped into something darker. His hands, once used to shake mine in false displays of respect, became weapons of humiliation. In one sudden, violent motion, he grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked. Pain seared across my scalp, my body jolting forward as he dragged me toward the door. Shock consumed me first. How could a son-in-law, someone entrusted to be part of our family, commit such an act? Disbelief froze me even as my body stumbled across the floor. His grip was merciless, each tug a declaration of his dominance, his. Rage no longer restrained by civility, fear followed quickly. For a brief moment, as my knees scraped against the cold surface beneath me, I wondered how far he was willing to go. Was this the moment where anger would spill into something irreversible? The humiliation cut deeper than the physical pain? To be treated not as a person, not as a matriarch, not even as family, but as something to be dragged, discarded, demeaned was. A wound no I could see, but every part of my soul felt. And yet, in the chaos of those few minutes, something remarkable stirred. Though fear throbbed in my chest and humiliation burned like fire, I refused to break. My dignity, quiet and steadfast, became my armor. I did not scream, I did not beg, I did not plead for mercy. My silence was deliberate, my composure intact. Each step he forced from me was met with a resolve that he could not comprehend. He could drag my body, but he could not touch my will. Neighbors heard the commotion. Footsteps stirred, voices gasped. But in my mind, time slowed. I realized that this was not only an act of violence, it was his confession. Every mask he had worn, every smile he had faked, every word he had twisted, all of it shattered in this moment. Here was his true self, exposed not by accusation but by his own hands. And though he thought he was demonstrating power, it was in truth revealing weakness. A man who could not win with reason, resorting to cruelty. When he finally let go, shoving me aside as though I were nothing, I rose slowly. My hair was disheveled, my body aching, but my back remained straight. I met his glare with calm, my silence louder than any outcry. In that instant, he wanted me broken, but what he found instead was unyielding resolve. The breaking point was, not minute was his. For though he dragged me out by my hair, he had dragged himself into the light of truth, exposing the ugliness he had tried so hard to conceal. And in that revelation, I knew that the balance of power had shifted forever. The night after the assault was unlike any other. Silence filled the house, but it wasn't the peaceful silence of rest, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of disbelief. My body still ached from the violent tug of his hands, but it was my heart that carried the deeper wound. The betrayal was not confined to a single act of aggression. It reverberated through the walls, reshaping the very foundation of trust upon which our family had been built. The whispers began almost immediately. Neighbors who had heard the commotion spoke in hushed tones outside their gates, their eyes heavy with pity when they saw me. How could he do this to her? They asked, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others clucking their tongues as though betrayal were a familiar tragedy they had seen too many times before. Their sympathy was genuine, but their murmurs carried another weight: shame. For in a community where family honor is currency, such violence was not just an attack on MIT, was a stain upon us all. Inside the family, lines began to form. My daughter, torn between the man she had chosen and the mother who had raised her, found herself in a quiet agony. I saw it in her eyes: guilt, sorrow, confusion. She wanted to defend him, to believe that the man she loved was not capable of cruelty. But reality had stripped away that illusion, leaving her caught between loyalty and truth. Other relatives were less conflicted. Their outrage was swift, their condemnation clear. For them, his mask had finally cracked, and the charm that had once deceived them was gone. But betrayal is never simple. It carries layers. This was not just about hair pulled or skin bruise. It was about trust shattered, about a sacred bond between families desecrated by greed and arrogance. His violence was not a moment of passion. It was the culmination of whispers we had ignored, red flags we had excused, a darkness we had allowed to grow within our home. That realization struck harder than the physical assault. We had seen glimpses of his nature before, and yet we had chosen to hope instead of confront. The social fallout deepened the wound. Invitations ceased. Conversations grew cautious. People who once spoke freely with him now avoided his gaze, sensing the danger that lay beneath his smile. He noticed, too. The weight of judgment pressed upon him, chipping away at his bravado. The man who once strutted with arrogance now bristled under scrutiny. His mask of confidence faltered. His words became defensive, brittle, as though he were fighting not just others' opinions, but his own reflection. For me, the aftermath was both painful and clarifying. Each day, as I looked at the bruises fading on my skin, I felt a deeper mark being carved into memory. I could not forget, nor could I forgive, not yet. But I also knew that this was more than an act of violence against me. It was an attack on the values I had safeguarded all my life. The family name, the legacy, the trust carefully cultivated. Across generations, all had been dragged through the dirt along with me. Yet even in that darkness, a shift occurred. Betrayal, I learned, has a strange power. It destroys illusions. Where once he had fooled us with charm, now we saw the truth. Where once he had hidden behind words, now his actions spoke louder. His betrayal became a mirror, reflecting not only his greed and violence, but also our strength to endure, to unite, and to rise above. The aftermath was not merely about humiliation, it was about awakening. Broken trust cannot be mended with apologies, but it can become the soil in which resilience grows. And though the whispers of neighbors and the pity in their eyes lingered, I stood taller with each passing day, knowing that while he had fractured the bonds of family, he had also forged within me a clarity that no mask could ever conceal again. In the weeks that followed, while the sting of betrayal still pulsed beneath the surface, I began to uncover the quiet strength I had carried all along. Many mistook my silence for weakness, but what they did not know was that silence can be a fortress. Long before this storm had erupted, I had built defenses not of stone and iron, but of foresight and preparation. The $5 million fortune, unknown to most of the family, was never meant to be paraded or flaunted. It was a carefully constructed shield, born from years of sacrifice, discipline, and relentless determination. Each dollar was not simply money, was security, legacy, independence. While others had focused on appearances and fleeting comforts, I had studied contracts, secured deeds, and ensured that the foundation of our future could not be stolen with a single act of malice. The property deeds were my first line of protection. Every signature, every notarized paper was a piece of armor meticulously arranged to safeguard the family name. Outsider, no matter how charming, how manipulative, could seize what was rightfully ours without meeting the weight of the law. And though few in the family knew of the measures I had taken, I carried them like a secret weapon, waiting for the day when foresight would prove stronger than brute force. Legal documents, drafted quietly and tucked away with trusted advisors, became the silent pillars holding up my resolve. Where others saw vulnerability, I saw opportunity to prepare. I knew human nature too well: the temptation of greed, the corrosion of envy, the silent schemes whispered behind closed doors, so I chose not to wait until the knife was at my back. Instead, I layered protection upon protection, ensuring that, even if betrayal came, I would not fall without recourse. The $5 million itself was more than a number. It was a testament to resilience of fortune, hidden not out of distrust, but out of wisdom. I understood that wealth could invite both admiration and treachery, and so I cloaked it in secrecy, keeping it close but invisible. To outsiders, I appeared as an aging matriarch with little more than pride to her name. In truth, I was a guardian of a legacy far greater than anyone imagined. And when betrayal finally struck, when his hands pulled me down and his arrogance tried to strip me of dignity, he had no idea he was grappling with a woman who had already built her defenses. He saw vulnerability, but he did not see the fortress behind my eyes. He believed he was seizing control, when in reality, he was walking into a net I had woven long before his greed exposed him. Preparation, I realized, is the purest form of power. It is not reactive but anticipatory. It does not shout but whispers. It does not rely on luck but on diligence. And as I looked at the signed papers, the sealed deeds, the untouchable safeguards, I felt no fear of what was to come. For while he had acted with violence, I had acted with vision. And vision, unlike brute strength, endures. Greed is a fire that consumes not only what it touches, but also the one who carries it. My son-in-law had entered our family with the polished charm of a man who knew how to play the part. He smiled at dinners, bowed his head in agreement during conversations, and spoke of loyalty as though the word belonged to him. But beneath that facade lived an insatiable hunger, a desire for control. Wealth and respect that was never truly his to command. And when he believed he had found the moment to seize it, his arrogance blinded him to the quiet shields I had already set in place. The first cracks appeared in the legal arena. With a confidence that bordered on reckless, he tried to manipulate documents, to position himself as the rightful inheritor of property and assets. But what he did not know and could not anticipate was that every deed, every paper, every line of ownership was meticulously secured in my name. The lawyers he thought would bend to his version of the truth instead faced ironclad evidence that left no room for interpretation. Where he expected submission, he found resistance crafted from foresight and law. His attempts collapsed like a house of cards in the face of undeniable facts. Yet the downfall was not limited to legal defeat. Reputation, once tarnished, rarely recovers, and his unraveling was witnessed by the very community he once sought to impress. Neighbors whispered of his violence, of the shameful night when he dragged me by the hair in a spectacle of rage. Friends who once shook his hand at gatherings now avoided his gaze. Respect, once offered freely, was withdrawn with quiet finality. His arrogance had not only betrayed Mitt, had betrayed the values of the very society in which he hoped to stand tall. The family, too, began to see through the mask. At first, some had been swayed by his charm or intimidated by his bluster. But betrayal has a way of clarifying loyalties. My children, my relatives, even those who had hesitated to take sides now witnessed the truth of his character. His attempts to dominate only revealed how small he truly was, how fragile his sense of power became when confronted with dignity and evidence. The bonds he had hoped to manipulate turned against him, leaving him increasingly isolated within the very circle he had sought to control. Arrogance led him to underestimate not only me, but the strength of the legacy he tried to tarnish. He believed money alone defined power. He thought brute force could silence history. But when his schemes crumbled, he stood exposed, a man who had gambled everything on deception, only to lose the one thing he valued most: respect. In the weeks that followed, his isolation deepened. No ally came to defend him. No sympathetic voice rose to excuse his actions. He walked through the marketplace, through family gatherings, through the corridors of life, carrying the invisible weight of disgrace. Greed had driven him to overreach. Arrogance had blinded him to consequence. And now both left him stranded. His downfall was not a grand explosion, but a slow, steady unraveling. The community turned cold, the family turned firm, and the law turned final. And as he stood, there once boastful, now diminished high, realized the truest punishment is not delivered by vengeance, but by the natural collapse of deceit. His empire of lies had crumbled, and all that remained was the hollow echo of what he had tried and failed to become. When the dust settled and the noise of betrayal began to fade, what remained was not the memory of violence or deceit, but the clarity of what truly mattered. Legacies are not built in a single act or destroyed in a single moment. They are shaped, protected, and carried forward through values that outlast betrayal. What my son-in-law had attempted was not merely to seize wealth, but to fracture the foundation of family itself. Yet in his failure, deeper truth revealed itself, that resilience and foresight are stronger than arrogance and greed. The fortune I had safeguarded was more than numbers in a ledger or properties on paper, symbolized independence, security, and a lifetime of perseverance. But more than that, it represented a responsibility, a duty to protect what was earned with integrity and ensure it continued as a shield for the generations that followed. That sense of responsibility was what guided me when betrayal struck. I chose not to lash out in anger, nor to reduce myself to the level of those who had wronged me. Instead, I chose dignity, preparation, and patience. In that choice, I discovered power that no violent act could take away. Family, though wounded, began to rediscover itself through honesty. The fractures left by betrayal were not healed overnight. Trust once broken takes time to mend. Yet tentative steps toward reconciliation began to take shape. My children, once caught between fear and loyalty, came forward with gestures of support. Conversations grew more open, respect flowed more freely, and I could sense that the ordeal had awakened a new appreciation for what bound us together. Betrayal had threatened to tear us apart, but resilience allowed us to rebuild stronger. This time with fewer illusions and more honesty. In quiet moments, I reflected not on the son-in-law's downfall, but on the lessons that his failure had carved into our story. It became clear that preparation is not paranoia, it is wisdom. To anticipate the storms of life, to protect what matters most before it is threatened, is not an act of fear but an act of love. He had thought me vulnerable, someone to be dismissed or controlled. What he discovered was that foresight transforms vulnerability into strength. And that dignity exercised in silence holds more weight than rage shouted aloud. Revenge would have been easy. A public shaming, a retaliatory act, or a display of anger might have offered momentary satisfaction. But true justice does not need theatrics. True justice unfolds naturally when arrogance meets preparation, when deceit meets evidence, when violence meets resilience. And so, instead of vengeance, I chose restoration. I allowed the truth to speak louder than anger. And in doing so, I reclaimed not only my legacy, but also my peace. Neighbors and friends who had once whispered began to approach me differently. Their words carried respect, not pity. They did not see a victim but a survivor who had preserved dignity in the face of cruelty. Their recognition was not of wealth or power, but of quiet resilience, the ability to withstand betrayal without being consumed by it. That respect earned through patience and principle became its own form of justice as I looked at the family business thriving once more. I realized legacy is not the wealth itself, nor the buildings or titles. Legacy lives in the decisions we make, the values we uphold, and the stories we leave behind for those who follow. Betrayal had been a chapter, but not the conclusion. The conclusion was one of resilience, foresight, and dignity, a reminder that integrity endures when all else falters. And so, the lesson stood clear. Power is not in control over others, but in control over oneself. To prepare without fear, to protect without arrogance, to endure without bitterness, that is the true inheritance worth passing on. It all began with betrayal, with the cruel act of being dragged out by my hair by someone who once called me family. What my son-in-law never realized, in all his arrogance and hunger for control, was that beneath the surface lay more than just a hidden fortune. The $5 million he sought to exploit was never the real source of strength. It was a shield, yes, but only because it represented foresight, preparation, and the quiet determination to protect what truly mattered. In his ignorance, he mistook power for money, dominance for respect, and aggression for strength. But life has a way of exposing illusions. His downfall was not caused by my wealth, but by his own greed, which blinded him to the truth that real wealth is not what you can take, but what you can build and preserve with integrity. He saw a fortune he thought he could steal. I saw it. Legacy that could never be erased. The story comes full circle here, not as a tale of revenge, but as one of resilience. My dignity remained intact, my principles unshaken, and my legacy preserved. He tried to reduce me to weakness, but in doing so he revealed his own. And while he fades into the shadows of his own choices, I continue forward with clarity, empowered not by what was hidden in bank accounts or deeds, but by the unshakable strength of integrity and foresight. So if there is a lesson to leave behind, it is this: wealth can be measured in numbers, but its true value lies in the wisdom to safeguard it, the courage to endure trials, and the patience to let justice unfold in its own time. Betrayal may wound, but resilience heals. Greed may destroy, but integrity endures. And in the end, that endurance is the greatest fortune of all.